So in this video, I'm going to show you a dozen examples of an under promotion to bishop where it's actually necessary. Now all of these compositions were generated autonomously and automatically by the computer program Chesthetica. This is the first one, computer generated chess problem 00795. Okay, we can see in this position that black has two rooks against white's queen and pawn, so material is about even. Now the tempting thing to do here would be to capture this rook with a promotion to queen, right? And then after king captures queen, queen captures rook, king to b7, queen to b4, check, maybe king to a6, king to c7, king to a7, followed by any number of ways to mate, including queen to a5 mate. That's a mate in 5 moves. Another possibility is simply to capture this other rook on a3, and then after king captures pawn, queen to b4 check, king to c8, queen to b6, black can delay with rook to a6, queen captures rook, king to b8, queen to b5 check, king to a7, king to c7, king to a8, and queen to a6 mate. That's a mate in 7. However, the best way to continue in this position is actually as follows. So king to c7. Now this threatens queen captures rook with mate. Black can try to buy time with rook to c3 check, queen captures rook, and here if black plays rook to c8 check to buy time, in this variation, white needs to underpromote to a bishop because underpromoting to a queen would result in a stalemate. King to a8 followed by queen to a5 or even a3, and that is checkmate. The next one we have is computer generated chess problem 01204 by Chesthetica. So in this position, it might be tempting to do something like rook to a8 check, king to b3, rook captures knight, check. King to b2 would allow white to gain a tempo by promoting to queen with check. So that's why king to b3, king to c2, white doesn't mind sacrificing a rook to promote to queen, king captures rook, rook to a3, king to c2, queen to c3 check, king to b1, rook to a1 mate. That's a mate in 6. However, the better way to proceed here is actually rook to b8. So now the king is locked into the a file. Now if black plays knight to c3, which is the best response, white should promote to a bishop. After knight to e4 check, the king maybe moves to e3, somewhere the knight cannot give check again. g2 would also work. Rook to a1 mate is being threatened, so if knight to c3 or knight to f6, bishop captures knight, king to a3 followed by rook to a1 mate, a mate in 5. So you might be wondering, why is it at this point we can't promote to a queen as well, or shouldn't rather? This is because after knight to e4 check, assuming the king moves to e3 like before, even though g2 is also possible, knight to c3. And here you can see, if the queen were to capture the knight, it would be a stalemate. But if it was the bishop, it could capture the knight, the king has to move to a3, and rook to a1 could stalemate in 5 moves. So here, the queen can't capture the knight, the queen has to go to h2, check, knight to e2 intervenes, queen captures knight check, king to a3, and mate on the 6th move. Just to show you that again, white should promote to bishop, knight to e4 check, king to e3, knight to c3, and at this point the bishop can capture the knight. The king has one place to go, which is a3, and rook to a1 mates on the 5th move. Basically the fastest solution and the way you should play this position, promoting to a bishop. So this one is composition 01672. Now here, black is clearly lost because the rook on c8 can be captured by the pawn with promotion no less. So what happens if we do the obvious thing and capture but with promotion to queen? We have a stalemate. What about if we promote to a rook? It's also a stalemate. What about to a knight? Well, then we've got king to c2, queen to a2 check, maybe king to d1, king to d3, and the next move is checkmate, like this, for example. That's a mate in 4. The best way to proceed is actually by underpromoting to a bishop. Because now what happens? After king to c2, which is the only move, bishop to g4. Now if king to d2, queen to c3 is mate, and if king to b1, bishop to f5 is mate. That's a mate in 3. This is CGCP 01991. Again, white is clearly winning here, and the obvious thing to do would be to promote to a queen. But if you do that, it's an immediate stalemate. Okay, what about if we promote to a rook? Well then, king to f6, queen to e4, maybe king to g5, rook to g8 check, king captures knight, it doesn't matter because checkmate follows on the fourth move with queen to g6 or even queen to h4. But if you take a look at this position more carefully, and maybe we can just confirm with the engines here, you can see that the best way to proceed is actually to underpromote to a bishop. Now here the king only has one option, which is to move to d6, and there are many ways to proceed. For example, knight to f7 check, king to d7, queen to c6 mates, or bishop to f6, another quiet move, king to d7, queen to c6 mates on the third move, or even bishop to c7, and if king to e7 or even king to d7, queen to f7 mates. Looking back at this original position, would you think to play the best move, which is under promoting to a bishop? Alright, let's take a look now at composition number 2026. So let's assume we promote to a queen with check, king to d6, maybe queen to e4, locking the king in. If king to d7, rook to d1 mates immediately. So king to c5, rook to c1 check, it's not mate, not yet anyway. King to b5, queen to b7 check, king to a4, rook to a1, a common mate by forcing the king to the edge of the board. But is there a better way? Let's see what the engines have to say. So there are many mates in 5, but the best way to continue is actually not to promote just yet, but to play rook to g5. Again, this locks the king in, kind of. Now if king to d7, rook to e5, maybe the king moves back to c6, a8 promotes to queen, king moves back to d7, and queen to d5 mates. However, black could play king to b6, and in this position, as you can see, if white chooses to promote, even though he doesn't have to, it must be a promotion to bishop, because a promotion to queen would be a stalemate. So promote to bishop, king to a6, bishop to b7 check, king to b6, and the other bishop, which you may not have realized was there, to d4 mate. Now to be fair, in this position, white does not have to promote to a bishop. Rook to e5 also works, in which case king to c6, and then promotion to queen with check, king to d7, and queen to d5 mates. This one is composition 2060 by Chesthetica. So in this position, if you promote the pawn to a queen, it's a stalemate. But does that mean you should promote to a bishop? Well, let's see what happens. King to a7, maybe the a4 bishop to c6, king to a6, bishop b5 check, king to a7, bishop on the a file to c6, king to b6, bishop to b8, king to a5, followed by bishop to c7 mate on the sixth move. But is this the promotion to bishop we were talking about? Not really. Let's take a look at the analysis. So the first move is actually bishop to b8, defending the pawn. Now if king to b7, which is black's best response, white has a few options. For example, bishop to b5. Obviously king to a8, bishop to c6 mates. So if king to b6, this is where the under promotion to a third bishop is necessary, because a queen would be stalemate and a rook would extend the mate to a mate in 5, as you can see from the analysis, whereas promoting to a knight would extend the mate even more. So under promotion to bishop here, the king is forced to a5 and bishop to c7 mates. But again, to be fair, at this point, white could also proceed with something like king to c5, in which case king to c8, and here you need to promote to a queen, king to d8, and bishop to d6, discovered checkmate. But if white chose to play bishop to b5, which mates just as quickly, and if black did respond with king to b6, then here, as you can see from the engine analysis, the best move is an under promotion to a third bishop. Composition 2063. So here the white pawn on e7 is being threatened. Maybe white can play something like knight to c6, defending the pawn, followed by king to f7, maybe king to g5, king back to e8, rook to d8 check, king to f7, here promoting to a queen. Even a rook would work, but why take a rook when you can have a queen? King to g7, followed by any number of ways to mate, including rook to d7 mate on the fifth move. But there is a better way. Let's take a look. Knight to f5, also defending the pawn. Notice how the king only has one move here, which is king to f7. And then there are a few ways to proceed. But if white chooses to proceed with rook to d8, and if black responds with king f6, here is where the under promotion to bishop is necessary. To avoid a stalemate, king to e6, and rook to d6 mate. Again, to be fair, white does not have to play rook to d8 here. He could play king to e5 and then maybe king to g8, e8 queen, king to h7 followed by rook to h2 mate. Now let's take a look at composition number 24-28. So here the obvious thing that people might do is maybe queen captures bishop, bishop to, the threat is queen to g8 mate. So maybe just to buy time, bishop to e5 check, king to d5. Now that the king is on a light colored square, the bishop cannot harass it. Bishop to g7, queen to f7, queen captures bishop with mate on the fourth move. But what about capturing the bishop with a promotion to queen? Two queens are better than one, right? Well, here we have the same problem. Bishop to e5 check. White has to deal with this. King to d5, bishop to g7, and here queen to h3 check is possible. Bishop intervenes, and mate occurs in many ways, including queen to g8 mate, but also on the fourth move. Let's go back again. Is there a better way? And the engines will reveal that there is. Now it's ironic that in capturing the black bishop, the best move or best continuation from this position is actually an under promotion to bishop. So pawn captures bishop with under promotion to bishop. You don't see that very often, do you? Bishop under promotions are generally quite rare, and ones like this are probably rarer still. So what if black tries the same tactic as before, bishop to e5 check? Now here, instead of moving to d5, white should capture the bishop. Now notice that in capturing the bishop, black is left with a lone king, and the lone king must have a square to play, which happens to be h8. This would not be possible if white had promoted to a queen. It would be a stalemate. Thankfully, he promoted to a bishop, and that blocks the queen on c8, which would also make it a stalemate. So after black plays king to h8, queen to h3 can be played with mate on the third move. Now it's obvious that a promotion to rook wouldn't work either, but what if white promoted to knight? Well, then the rook is left undefended. So you see, in this position, white really has to promote to a bishop. A computer composed this, by the way, all on its own. Is that computational creativity or what? Okay, this one is CGCP 02490 by Chesthetica. So again, we are faced with the obvious choice of capturing the rook with a promotion to queen. So what if we do that? With check, no less. Now if queen to e7, rook to f5 mates immediately. So king to f7, queen to g8 check. If king to f6, queen to f8 mates. So king to e7, rook captures queen finally. King to d7, and there are a few ways to proceed. Rook to e6 also works. King to c7, queen to f7 check. King to d8, rook to e8 mate on the sixth move. Let's go back. It turns out that even here, an under promotion to bishop works better. In fact, a lot better. You can mate in half the time. Let's see why. Pawn captures rook with under promotion to bishop with check. Now again, if queen to e7, rook to f5 mates. So king to f7. Now here, it's possible to play rook captures queen without a stalemate because the king has one square to go to, which is f8, and rook to f5 can mate. Had white under promoted to a queen, that would not be possible. But what if white under promoted to a knight? Well, look at the analysis. It's a draw. Queen to e4 check, king to g8, queen captures pawn, rook to f5 check, king to e7, knight to f7, queen to g3, knight to e5, and white will find it difficult to make progress. So under promotions to knight can also be quite interesting or attractive or both, but the rarest under promotion is still the under promotion to bishop, like you just saw. This is composition 2560 by Chesthetica. So here once again we have a piece on the back rank, a queen in this case, that is en prise in a position to be captured by the pawn. So most people will probably do that, capture a queen with promotion to queen, so that automatically gives white a 17 Shannon point advantage, 9 points for the black queen, and another 9 points for the white queen, subtracting 1 point for the pawn that was exchanged, so 17 Shannon pawn units of material. Most people would go just right for that. If rook to b7, then rook to a2 mates immediately, so black will try a better defense to buy some time. Rook to c7 check, or at least a computer would. A human would probably resign, but a computer would play this. White has to deal with the check, king to b4, rook to b7 check, knight captures rook, king captures knight, rook to d7 check, king to c6, queen to c7 mates on the fifth move. But there's a better way, and we will confirm with the engines. So why checkmate in 5 moves when you can do so in 3? You just have to under promote to a bishop. So the threat is similar to as before. Rook to a2 mate is being threatened. To stop this, at least temporarily, black needs to play rook to c7 check, bishop captures rook, and now you can see why a bishop works better than a queen in this position, because the queen capturing the rook would cause a stalemate. So the king can move to a7, and now the rook can checkmate on a2. This is composition 2803 by Chesthetica. So the obvious thing to do here is promote to queen, as most people would. But what happens if we do that? Black can play knight to c4, check, forking the king and queen, a royal fork. Now if rook captures knight, this is a stalemate. So white needs to play, for example, maybe king to c3. He loses the queen, but it's okay. We have another. Rook to d4 check, knight to d5 intervening, rook captures knight, king to c6, making a run for it, queen to c5 check, king to b7, rook to d7 check, king to b8, queen to f8 mates on the 7th move. So the better way to play, the most efficient way, is actually to underpromote to a bishop. And here's why. So underpromote to a bishop. Now if knight to c4, check, forking the king and queen as before, the rook can capture the knight and the king is not stalemated. So king to d8 and queen to e7 mates on the 3rd move. But if black saw that, he might try something else. King to c7, queen to c5 check, maybe king back to d7, queen captures knight, king to c8, rook to b8 mate on the 4th move. So based on the engine analysis, you can see the best way to proceed is actually under promoting to a bishop. Now interestingly, we saw that the promotion to a queen leads to a mate in 7. But even under promoting to a knight is faster with a mate in 5. King to c6, queen to b6 check, king to d5, rook to d4 check, king to e5, queen captures knight, king to f5, queen to f4 mate. Notice how the knight guards the e6 and g6 squares. Promoting to a rook also mates faster than promoting to a queen, believe it or not. If knight to c4 check, the rook can capture, king to d6, rook to d8 mates. But black can last a bit longer by playing knight to b5 instead, rook captures knight, king to c6, queen to b6 check, king to d7, rook to d5 check, king to e7, and then queen to d6 or even queen to f6 checkmates on the 5th move. Let's rewind. So this position, surprisingly, the best way to continue is to underpromote to a bishop. But in addition to that, underpromoting to a knight or rook is also better than promoting to a queen. Do you think you could have composed something like this? Maybe you should give it a try. Okay, so this last computer-generated chess problem by Chesthetica, number 3140, also features a bishop underpromotion, but by black, or the losing side in this case. It looks like black is about to promote to a queen, and white has to stop him somehow. Let me show you the engine analysis of this position. So the fastest way to win this is to play knight to f3. Let's say black continues with b2. White needs to continue with knight to d4. Now why is it promoting to a queen doesn't work as well for black? Because rook to e1, a rook sacrifice. If queen captures the rook on e1, knight to c2 is checkmate with a royal fork to boot. The queen can't capture the rook on b5 because it's pinned. But what about queen to d1? The same thing. Knight to c2 is mate because the pawn on a2 blocks the king's flight square and the queen is pinned and can't capture the knight. Alright, but how does promoting to a bishop help? Let's say white tries the same tactic, rook to e1, black is stalemated. So he might try king to g1 and the bishop can move along this diagonal, maybe to g6, rook to e1 check, the bishop moves back, and now knight to c2 mates on the 5th move. You may ask yourself, okay, but wouldn't under promoting to a knight also work? No, because knight to c2 can mate on the 3rd move. What about under promoting to a rook? Same thing, knight to c2 mates on the 3rd move. So black under promoting to a bishop is necessary to last as long as possible in this position. White can continue, the bishop moves away, rook to e1, bishop moves back, and only on the 5th move, knight to c2 mates. A necessary under promotion to bishop by black. You don't see that every day, do you? In any case, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.
Chesthetica's Book of Chess Constructs, Volumes 1 through 5. Available on Amazon.